As the tide began to turn, Petrograd was spared, but Trotsky's tactics would be deployed in the Second World War and to great effect during the battles for Stalingrad. At another low point, Trotsky and Lenin considered what might have to be done if the key cities fell. Lenin remarked that in such an eventuality, the only serious option would be to shift to the countryside and mountains and wage a continuous guerrilla war. This became academic as the White Guards began to lose support and the Red Army launched simultaneous counteroffensives on several fronts. A decade later, in China, the defeats suffered by the Communists in Shanghai in 1927 and Canton in 1930 left no other serious option for Mao Zedong and his comrades but to withdraw to the countryside, symbolized by the epic Long March, and create a politico military red base in Yan'an, the first major site of dual power in the country. A British naval assault on Kronstadt was ultimately rebuffed. On 7 November 1919, the second anniversary of the revolution, Trotsky announced to the National Executive of the Soviets that the Civil War had been won, that the white generals had fled, and that enlisted British prisoners of war had been released, but officers were being brought to Moscow. George Lansbury, then a Labour MP and editor of the Daily Herald, had advised the Bolshevik leaders to free the soldiers, but to keep the officers hostage to force British recognition of the Soviet Union. Churchill had lost. His obsessions had led to more carnage. Another crime in the ledger. There is an interesting footnote to this story. Not every member of the Churchill family was hostile to Bolshevism. The talented sculptor Claire Sheridan, Churchill's first cousin, whom he adored and treated as a sister, shocked him one day by announcing at breakfast that she was desperate to go to Moscow, see for herself what was going on, and sculpt the heads of Lenin and Trotsky. Churchill worked himself into a rage, denouncing the two men and the Bolsheviks in general as criminals and monsters. Sheridan ignored him and established direct contact with a Soviet trade delegation, then ensconced in London, trying to end the British sanctions and embargo. The delegation was led by two veteran Bolsheviks, Lev Kamenev and Leonid Krasin. Kamenev, one of Lenin's oldest comrades and Trotsky's brother in law, agreed to see her. He was startled both by her beauty and her request, pointing out politely that Lenin and Trotsky were quite busy men, and it was unlikely that they would be able to see her. She persisted, meeting Kamenev on a number of social occasions, and, as the cliché goes, one thing led to another. Churchill's cousin bedded the Bolshevik leader. A weekend trip to the Isle of Wight sealed the bond. Sly little Kamenev. Who would have guessed? Certainly not his close colleagues or his wife. Claire Sheridan got her way. The Churchill connection must have amused both Lenin and Trotsky. Lenin sat for her, but kept on working all the while. She recalls him as taciturn, though he described Churchill as our enemy who relies too much on the court and the army. Trotsky invited her to accompany him on his train to the Civil War front, but she declined. She left Moscow late in 1920. On her return to England, she was reported to have said, "I was given comfortable quarters in a requisitioned house. Both Lenin and Trotsky are excellent sitters. I had 8 hours with Lenin and 20 with Trotsky." She was taken with the latter, and a flirtation ensued. She later wrote that Trotsky had asked her to inform her London friends that when Trotsky kisses, he never bites. She wrote in the Times that Trotsky talked pictures, art, and literature. He had the head of a Mephisto. He had a wonderful personality and is full of fire. He has read the best English literature and once said to me that if England had never done anything but produce Shakespeare, she would have justified her existence. Of Lenin, she wrote, "From the art point of view, I think he is the most interesting man in the world. His eyes are most extraordinary. I modeled him in his room at the War Office while he was at work at his desk. His calmness in all circumstances is extraordinary. No matter how excited others get, he always preserves his impassiveness. The same could not be said for her cousin." Sheridan's mother wrote to her on her return, "I forgive you, darling, as I would even if you had committed a murder." But for a long time, Churchill never spoke to his cousin, and she was temporarily exiled to the United States. On her part, she never forgave Stalin for murdering all my friends. Churchill, in contrast, was not unduly upset by the extermination of 90% of Lenin's Central Committee. This only made it easier to do business with Stalin when the next war erupted.